The breast cancer journey does not begin and end with treatment. Our guest on this episode not only survived breast cancer, but went on to be part of an organization that strives to help those with every imaginable aspect of the journey. She is Molly Lindquist from the Rose City of Portland, Oregon, and this is her story of treatment and post-treatment. So here she is. And Molly, welcome to the Cancer Interviews podcast.
Thanks, Bruce. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we know that you have a life exclusive of cancer, and we want to hear about that so we can get to know you a little bit better. So if you would, please tell us a bit about where you're from, what you do for work, and what you do for fun.
Yes. Well, I am from Portland, Oregon, and I actually was born and raised here, which these days in Portland, I joke I'm a bit of a unicorn. And spent about a decade in the Bay Area. I went down to Stanford University for my undergraduate degree and actually ended up meeting my husband there. So we lived in the Bay Area for about 10 years, had our first daughter in San Francisco. And once I was tethering the stroller strap to my wrist each time we were walking up and down the hills of San Francisco, I said, maybe it's time to go back to Portland. So we moved back in 2008 and right before the birth of my second daughter. So most of my free time these days are spent schlepping kids to activities. I have a volleyball player daughter and a figure skating daughter. So a lot of time in the gym and in the ice rink. And I also love reading and playing golf as well.
Now let's go to your cancer journey. For all of us who are survivors of cancer, there was that moment in time, maybe not a moment, but a juncture in which things went from being fairly normal physically to something other than normal. For you, how did that manifest itself?
Bruce, I always think of it as my life BC before cancer. I was relatively young when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I was 32 years old. I had two small children. My daughters were 3 and 5 at the time. And I, had kind of the somewhat typical experience of I felt something funny in my breast while I was taking a shower. My first inclination was like, I'm 32, it's probably nothing. But I did have two grandmothers on both sides of my family who had had breast cancer, one premenopausally and one postmenopausally. And so that gave me that extra moment of like, well, let's just, get this checked out. And that very quickly turned from a, routine visit to my OBGYN. She said, it's probably nothing, but we can go get an ultrasound if that'll make you feel better. And I vividly remember, Bruce, and I know many of your listeners, I'm sure, had this moment where I'm wandering between rooms as the ultrasound turned into a mammogram and turned into an immediate biopsy. And I literally felt like I was swimming, kind of like, what is happening right now? I hadn't even thought to ask my husband to attend the appointment with me because, it was nothing. I didn't want him to have to take time off work. And very quickly, the radiologist came in and said, we suspect this is cancer. And that was the moment when, the life BC kind of shattered and, the new normal, so to speak, began.
Molly, everybody has a somewhat different reaction to this awful news. We already know it's awful, so I'm not going to ask you if it was awful. Of course it was. But different people react in different ways. What was your reaction when you heard that BC had expired?
Yeah, I think, again, I went through the typical stages of grief, really, where at first it was denial. How is this happening? Then it was much more, okay, I need a plan. I tend to be a bit of a type A personality. And so, I think the hardest part for me was that point of diagnosis to when we had a treatment plan in place, which for me entailed a bilateral mastectomy followed by chemo. Ironically, although I was certainly nervous about the surgery and treatments, et cetera, I was relieved to have a plan. I wanted that cancer out. I just, it's almost like I could feel it growing in me once I knew it was there. So I think for me, once I had the plan, emotionally and mentally, I felt much more control over the situation, and then of course, just dealing with the, kind of balancing two small children. My husband is actually a physician, and his coworkers were amazing and covered his shifts so he could go to chemo with me. My family stepped in, to help plan meals and care for my kids. And, I am so incredibly grateful for the support system I had, and really the friends that came out of the woodwork, people I hadn't heard from in forever who were sending meals, and, even just a text to say, hey, I'm thinking about you. Because I think, in talking now after, my diagnosis with a lot of other patients, it's really isolating. You feel alone. You feel like the world is going on, around you while you are paused in this moment of, really of fear and panic. And it's incredibly isolating. So even just to get a text that said, hey, I'm thinking about you, was incredibly, incredibly helpful during, my diagnosis and treatment time. And I really have vowed since then to pay it forward. I can never repay the kindness that my community showed me, but I can hopefully show that to others and help others, hopefully have a little bit easier experience, as much as that's possible, given, the crappy experience of cancer at a baseline.
By the way, we're confident you'll be able to learn some tips and tools to help you through your personal cancer journey. But first, we'd like to invite you to please give us a like, leave a comment or a review below, and share this story with your friends. Kindly click on the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so you'll be notified about our next cancer interview. And if you or a loved one are facing a cancer journey, please click on the link in the description and show notes below to get our free guide, The Top 10 Things I Wish I Knew When I First Got Cancer. Now, Molly, it sounds like you had a full arsenal of support, a lot of metaphoric wind at your back here as you went through this journey. Given that, was it relatively easy? Yes, we're talking about cancer, but was it relatively easy to maintain hope through these difficult times?
Bruce, I think that ebbed and flowed, if I'm being honest. There were some days that I woke up and thought, you know what, this too shall pass. I just have to push through and make it through. And there were other times when I'd wake up and be like, oh, why me? Like, why is this happening to me? And I think, again, having that support system through the emotional ups and downs was incredibly helpful. I knew that, my prognosis was good. I was early stage had been caught early. I do have a genetic mutation. So I think what compounded my experience was then, thinking about how is this going to impact my daughters? They, again, as I mentioned, were 3 and 5 at the time, so very little. But, knowing that this whole cancer thing was going to be the gift that keeps on giving in terms of not only my own personal experience and, long-term side effects from cancer, but also how it would impact my daughters specifically. Through it all, though, I will say that the fact that I did have, my community that rallied around me, they gave me hope on the days when I was in those dark kind of, naders of feeling sick after chemo and, again, questioning why me. Those people picked me up and carried me kind of through those valleys. And again, that's something I can never, ever repay. But again, I hope to pay that forward.
And we're going to talk about that pay forward process a little bit farther down the line in our conversation. Molly, now you had mentioned that you and your care team came up with a game plan for treatment of your cancer. But if you would, tell us a bit about the treatment regimen, what you had to go through.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Bruce, I ended up having a bilateral mastectomy. So I actually only had cancer in one breast, but it was extensive. So it felt like, one tumor, but it ended up being a cluster of tumors with then DCIS, which is the precursor to cancer kind of filling that left breast for me. And so the bilateral, for me, I opted to get rid of both, so to speak, because for me, the mental piece of it, there's not a lot of data that actually shows that that's necessary. However, I knew I would just constantly be worrying about it, be thinking about it. As I mentioned, my type A kind of anxious personality at baseline was just catapulted throughout this experience. And so the surgery itself, was trying, and I was a little bit arrogant going into it because I thought, all these statistics are for older people. I'm, in my early 30s, I'll bounce right back. But, having that surgery is no joke. And it took me a while to regain, mobility and energy. Once I was more healed from that, then I started chemo. So, clearly some patients now, will have chemo before their surgery. So there are a lot of different treatment paths. Mine happened after, and it was really kind of a progressive thing. And again, what I was most concerned about was how would my daughters react when I lost my hair. For people who are watching this versus listening right now, I have, kind of my old hair back, which is long. And, I thought that might scare my kids. So we actually, I'll tell you a funny anecdote, Bruce. My 3-year-old at the time, we were explaining, mommy has to take this medicine. It's called chemo. It's going to, make the bad cancer cells go away. But sometimes it also gets other cells, which means my hair might fall out. I said, but it'll be really funny. You can call me Baldy Mommy. And they thought that was hilarious. Like, oh, Baldy Mommy. And then that backfired me on a bit, Bruce, because we were out in public one day and my 3-year-old spotted a gentleman who did not have hair as well and started pointing and saying, hey, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I swear she's not that misbehaving, so I pulled off my hat and, it was clear why she was doing that. But, we tried to normalize their experience as much as possible and really answer the questions that, kids are going to come and present. I think, another moment that I'll never forget was when my 5-year-old, kind of looked at me after hearing about cancer, and we had actually described it a lot like Legos. She was into Legos at the time, and how your cells, build your body just like Legos. You build a structure with Legos, and how, cancer cells start growing, and, you have to stop them because they'll keep building and building. And she looked at me and she said, Mom, are you going to die? And I think that moment, just the innocent kind of straight to the point question, just, it really got me. That was the moment when, all of this really started to hit home in terms of what does this mean? And again, thankfully, I'm still here to annoy her now as a teenager. And so for me, I was lucky, but I think, now as all of us who've gone through this experience and get to know people in our community, I have many friends who have passed, and, I carry each of them with me, and not to harp on the pay it forward, but I think, I try to recognize that, they're not here to do those things. And so I will do that for them. And so I feel like I have this army, in my heart of these amazing people who were taken too soon, who really, inspire me and motivate me. And again, even this long post-cancer, keep me on mission of trying to help others going through this experience.
Speaking of the experience, chemo was part of it, and some things that we often hear that are part and parcel of the chemo experience could be fatigue, the terrible taste of food, and cognitive issues. Were any of those part of the chemo experience for you?
All of the above, Bruce. I remember, I would be laying on the couch. I did a lot of binge watching of Netflix at that time. So watching my shows, and I would get up, to go across the room into the kitchen and, make it, again, not a long distance, and just be incredibly winded. And, just again, as a young, relatively in shape person at that point, it was very jarring to go from, feeling in good health to, real struggling to even cross the room. So the fatigue was definitely real. The taste of food, I tried to avoid things that I really liked because everything tasted a little off. I think it really impacted everything. And to be honest with you, and this, Bruce, is where I joke a little, because I still think the chemo brain fog exists, even, as far out as I am from my treatment. I say that I use chemo brain instead of maybe aging brain. It could be a little more the latter, but the cognitive piece of it is absolutely there. And I think something that has often been dismissed historically as being in a patient's head, but absolutely the brain fog, not being able to grasp words. For me, that had never been a problem prior to cancer, and absolutely was, especially during treatment, and frankly still, hits me periodically.
Molly, we had talked about that point in time, that juncture when you noticed your overall physical health was taking a turn for the worse. Now let's flip the script and get to the point in which you felt as if you were really improving, that there was metaphoric light at the end of the tunnel with respect to your cancer journey. What was that like?
Oh, I remember when my hair first started growing back. That was kind of that turning point where I'm like, it was like spring had come, and, the flowers were starting to bloom, and here were these little sprouts on my head. I think I felt so grateful. I think my overarching emotion throughout, frankly, even on the really dark days, was gratitude for the things that I did have versus really, trying not to dwell on the things that I had lost in the experience. So that hair growth was this very fine little baby covering of hair, and it just felt so transformative. So I think, very quickly for me, I transitioned into, okay, how can I channel this experience, which I wouldn't wish upon anyone, but, we only have control of certain things in our lives. And I did not have control of the fact that I got cancer, but I do have control of what I want to do with that experience going forward. And so for me, very quickly, it became, okay, this sucked, not fun. How can I now use that to help others going forward? So I think for me, that the focus on creating purpose out of the experience really helped me kind of get out of the funk of active treatment and not feeling well at a emotional level.
And we want to talk about what you are doing and with others to help those on breast cancer journeys. But just one final question about your cancer journey. If you can think of yourself at being 100% your health pre-diagnosis, think of where you are now, quantify it if you could against 100%. How are you now?
I have no complaints, Bruce. I don't know in terms of a percentage, again, because it gets a little conflated with aging, which people are, complain about wrinkles and, slowing down and aches and pains. And man, I am grateful for every ache and pain that I have the privilege of experiencing these days, because again, I certainly have friends that have not had that opportunity. So day to day, I am doing fantastic. I certainly live with some of the effects of medications and treatments. However, I've been able to manage those. I think my biggest tip for other cancer patients and survivors is to do not hesitate to reach out for the mental piece and mental health support, because I think we focus so much on physically getting well or physically, treating our body to get rid of the cancer. But man, you're going through an emotional roller coaster, and it's okay to ask for help for that. It took me a while to feel like I could do that, but it has been incredibly helpful, even years past my diagnosis, to have support in that realm. So I am doing great. I am busy, annoying my kids with, I call them mom jokes instead of dad jokes. And again, trying to, be a positive aspect of people's cancer experience.
You talked about wanting to pay it forward to others. those sentiments are great, but you didn't just express those sentiments, you put them into action. If you would talk about the genesis of going forward with an organization called Manta Cares. That's two separate words, M as in Mary, M-A-N-T-A, Cares. Tell us about the genesis of Manta Cares and what it does.
Absolutely. So I was very fortunate to be introduced to Samira Daswani, who is the founder of Manta Cares. She is a fellow breast cancer survivor. And, once you're in the club, in the Unfortunate Cancer Club, you tend to find these amazing people through that experience. So Samira is one of those people. She'd actually created a planner, a paper planner, while she was going through chemo to help stay organized and in control. And it has a history. Her professional background is in, bioengineering and healthcare design. So ironically, she was very well prepared professionally for when she personally had her diagnosis of breast cancer. And that paper planner has now helped over 1,500 people. It's available to purchase on Amazon or on the Manta Cares website. And we are rolling out a digital platform this fall, actually. So, stay tuned, check the website. There's going to be some really exciting ways that I think cancer patients will have an easier way to navigate their experience.
That website, what is its address?
Manta Cares, that's MantaCares.com. Manta like manta rays, cares.
And we just want to make a distinction. The name of the organization is two words, but the web address is one word. Manta and Cares are fused together, mantacares.com. Now, an interesting question, and Molly, I wonder if you've given this much thought, but if Manta Cares had been around when you were going through your cancer journey and you knew about Manta Cares, how might that alter the course in some form or fashion?
Bruce, that is exactly why I got involved with the organization, because the minute I saw the planner, I was like, oh, I wish I would have had this when I was going through my experience. So again, the organizational piece, the gratitude journaling, there are lots of science-backed frameworks in the planner to help kind of navigate the cancer experience. I know many of us here, we're sitting in our appointments with our oncologists and again, feeling very emotional. So being able to write down questions, to write down, thoughts that happen during the appointment, really documenting the experience is incredibly helpful and has, been scientifically proven to improve outcomes as well. So it's a win-win. I wish I had it, but I encourage everyone to take a look at it on our website.
Molly, we're going to wrap things up now. And whereas we always start our interviews from the same place, personalizing our guest, we end our interviews in the same fashion. And to some degree, you've already answered this question, but I think in this situation, there's nothing wrong with being a bit redundant. Let's imagine that you encountered on the street or any other setting, you encountered somebody who'd just been diagnosed with breast cancer, and you had a private audience with this person. You had a chance to impart some wisdom that is a byproduct of your experience. There might be a bunch of things you'd want to say to this person, but if you can think of one or two that you would want to make darn sure that it resonated with this person, what would those things be?
That's a fantastic question, Bruce. I think first of all, I would, ask them if they needed a hug, because sometimes when you've been through it, someone just wants an ear to listen and, a shoulder to cry on. So I think first and foremost, I would offer that up, because often that is the most useful piece of that experience. Secondly, I would say just keep moving forward. There are going to be days that are incredibly hard, but there are going to be days where this experience provides silver linings that you can't even imagine. So just keep going. You can do it.
All right, Molly, I think that in a cyber kind of way, you've already given the listener and viewer a bit of a hug. So we're already off to a good start. So Molly Lindstrom, Portland, Oregon, want to thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Thanks for being with us on Cancer Interviews and the Cancer Interviews podcast.
Thank you, Bruce. I really enjoyed it.
And one more time, we want to share that web address for Manta Cares. It's one word, mantacares.com. So we're going to wrap up this episode. And when we wrap up, we always tell you that if you or a loved one are on a cancer journey, you are not alone. There are people out there just like Molly. There are organizations like mantacares.com that can do things to certainly not eliminate your cancer journey, but they can certainly ease it and make some of the difficult steps a bit less difficult. So until next time, we'll see you on down the road.